Hi, I'm Luke McIntosh, creator of BecomeABassist.com, and welcome to lesson 7 of Bass Chord Pro. Now in this lesson we're going to be taking everything we've been learning in the last 3 videos and put it all together to end up playing one of the most common chord progressions ever created that's been played in music. Chances are you've heard it hundreds or even thousands of times. You'll be using both the type 1 and the type 2 chords that you've been learning over the last 3 lessons to create a super smooth way of playing this chord progression, and you're going to be using something called voice leading. All in this one video. Check it out. So the chord progression we're going to be talking about is called a 2-5-1 progression. You'll find this kind of chord progression everywhere. It's in pop music, it's in jazz music, it's occasionally in rock music. It's everywhere. You've heard it. I guarantee you've heard it hundreds of times, if not thousands. So when we talk about a 2-5-1 progression, there are 3 chords. There's the 2 chord, the 5 chord, and the 1 chord. Super, super simple. Now, the 2 chord will always be a minor 7th chord. The 5 chord will always be a dominant 7th chord, and the 1 chord will always be a major 7th chord. Now let's keep using G as our root because that's what we're used to. So if G is our root, it's going to be our 1 chord. So we know that the 3rd chord out of the 2-5-1 is going to be a G major 7th chord. Now how do we know it's a major 7th chord? Because in a 2-5-1, the 1 chord will always be a major 7th chord. So this is going to be our 1 chord. This is the 3rd chord out of all 3 of them. Now how about this 2 chord? Well, if we use the scale method we've been using in the last couple of videos, we just count up the G major scale until we get to 2. You can count to 2, right? So we go 1, 2. So this is an A. So we know that our 2 chord is going to be some kind of A chord. Now remember earlier in the video I said that the 2 chord will always be a minor 7th chord? So we know that in our chord progression right now, the 2 chord is going to be an A minor 7th chord, right here, A minor 7th. Too easy. Now what about the 5 chord? It's going to be the 5th. So if we use our scale method again, counting up from G, because that's our root, remember? So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is going to be our 5 chord. It's going to be some kind of D. So we've got the 5th fret on our A string, that's a D, so it's going to be some kind of D chord. And if you remember what I said earlier in the video, the 5 chord is always a dominant 7th chord. So this is going to be a dominant 7th chord. So now we have our full progression. We have A minor 7th to D7 to G major 7th. Too easy, nothing to it. Now all we have to figure out is how to voice this nicely so it's nice and smooth and easy to play also. So let's get down to it. There are 2 ways of voicing this chord progression really smoothly. They both work just as well as each other, and they're both super easy to play. They both stay in position and they avoid those big jumps that we were talking about in the last lesson. Now the first way of voicing this chord progression is to start with our 2 chord on a type 1 minor 7th chord. Now you can either go to the PDF chart you got back in lesson 4, or you can just find an A, because remember our 2 chord is an A minor 7th chord. Just find our A and build a type 1 minor 7th chord. So remember our shape, we have our A on the bottom, 7th and 3rd. So we have just all 5 across here, 5 on the E string, 5 on the D string, and 5 on the G string. Too easy, that's our first step. Now, next we find our 5 chord. Now remember we said our 5 chord was a D7 chord, a dominant 7th chord. So we could play this as a type 1 all the way up here. Of course this is going to be our root here, a D. But remember that's big jump. So what do we do instead? We play this D7 chord as a type 2. And what's the easiest way to do that? Just find a D right here and just build a type 2 shape. So there's our type 2 D7 chord, and that's the one we want to use because that gives us this sound. Much smoother than this. Both work, but this is much smoother and much easier. From our A minor 7 chord, type 1, to our D7 chord, type 2. This is exactly why we learnt type 1 and type 2 chords. It's so we can avoid big old jumps. If we only knew one type of chord, we'd have to do this all the time. But if we know both types, we can make things a lot easier for ourselves and also a lot more enjoyable for the listener. Now this is what's called good voice leading. And because all of the notes, all the voices within the chord are interacting in a very, very smooth way. All the voices are kind of leading into each other. This not so good voice leading because the voices are jumping all around. But this, because every voice moves very little, it's great voice leading, and it also sounds really good. So there's many reasons to play this kind of chord progression like this. So we're on our 5 chord, our D7, and we need to get to our 1 chord, our G major 7. So do we play that as a type 1 or a type 2? Well, our type 2 all the way up here. So we'd be jumping from here to here. Less than ideal. So let's see if our type 1 works any better. So we have our D7 chord. That's much nicer. Check it out. So we go from D7 to our G major 7. There's great voice leading, no big jumps, easy to play. This ticks all the boxes. So the whole sequence goes like this. Type 1 minor 7th chord, type 2 dominant 7th chord, type 1 major 7th chord. This is the first way of playing our 2-5 progression. If you wanted to play this same sequence, this same chord progression in a different place, all we would need to do is start on a different type of chord. So we started on our type 1 minor 7th chord. What if we play the same chord as a type 2? So we're going to start our chord progression on a type 2 instead of a type 1 this time. We started on type 1, then we went to type 2, then we went back to type 1. But if we start on a type 2, we're going to play type 2, type 1, type 2. Pretty simple, right? So I'm going to do that again a little bit slower this time. So we have our A minor 7th, we have our A on the bottom, and our C and our G. And you can refer to either the PDF download, or you can just find an A and then build a type 2 chord. Either way works. So we have our A minor 7th. Now we're going to go to a type 1 D7 chord, and all we need to do is find a D right there, and then build our type 1 dominant 7th chord, and then to our type 2 G major 7 chord, one you're very familiar with already. So that whole sequence, A minor in type 2, D7 in type 1, G major 7 in type 2. Too easy. And this is the exact same notes as we played down here. The notes haven't changed at all. All that's changed is the way they're voiced. Oh. And voice leading is the same in either one. So we have... See how none of the voices are jumping around too much. They're all staying pretty well in the same places and just shifting a little bit and creating this beautiful sound. Beautiful. So to review, in our 2-5 chord progression, the 2 is always a minor 7th chord, the 5 is always a dominant 7th chord, and the 1 is always a major 7th chord. We use the scale method to find our 2 and our 5, so we use G, and then we found our 2, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. We use those to find the roots of our chords, and then we just plugged in our shapes. So if we start on a type 1 minor 7th chord, we use a type 2 dominant 7th chord, and then a type 1 major 7th chord. If we start on a type 2 minor 7th chord, then we play a type 1 dominant 7th chord, and then type 2 major 7th chord. And when we mix up these type 1 and type 2s, it's super easy to play, sounds great, it's good voice leading, they tick all the boxes. In the next and final lesson in Bass Chord Pro, you'll learn all of the other less common types of chords that will completely fill your bag of tricks when it comes to playing bass chords. You'll learn diminished chords, augmented chords, and you'll also learn how you can change and modify the chords you already know to create new chords and new sounds. So once again, thanks for watching. I'm Luke McIntosh, creator of BecomeABassist.com, and I'll see you in the final video.